Howdy, everybody. It's Nick. I think we're just waiting for more people to come on in.
All right, it's officially 1 o'clock. It looks like there's a few more people coming in the waiting room, so hopefully somebody let them in. All right, I wanted to give a training on CSP non-industrial private farmlands just to get everybody on the same page and maybe give you an understanding about what we're promoting and give you some more education. I am Rubiana Neely. I am the CSP coordinator. I started in February, so I'm still a little new to the role, but I'm trying to do a lot more outreach and education to get everybody more enthusiastic about CSP instead of dreading the program.
Rubiana, were you, just a reminder to record, please?
Yep, the recording is on.
Thank you.
So everybody knows that they can watch it at a later date. I just wanted to go into the basic principles of conservation stewardship program. No one knows more about your land than you do, and no one knows more about conservation than we do. Together, we can develop a plan tailored to your land and your goals to help you increase productivity and protect the value of your land. CSP statistically is the largest federal conservation program by acreage in the nation. Iowa last year had $16.5 million and we contracted 377. We've had low interest in NIF in the past. We only had 16 contracts new and 8 renewals. So this year in fiscal year 23, we're supposed to be getting $23 million, which is almost double what we got last year. And we only had 30 applications that weren't selected for funding. So with more money, we will need more applications. And so outreach will be needed and working with our partners to spread the word, which you as foresters are part of our partners. So this is why I'm reaching out to you to give you some more education and background so you can talk comfortably about CSP yourselves. And I want to talk about a little bit of difference between EQIP and CSP because there's an often common theme about which program would be appropriate for a customer when they walk in the door. EQIP addresses 1 or 2 specific resource concerns, while CSP is looking at all resource concerns that might be applicable on their operation. That's back to the planning assessment of an entire operation for CSP and EQIP. They could be signing up for just one small field. CSP does require new conservation efforts at time of application to be implemented and to be existing on their operation. There is also payment cap differences between CSP and EQIP. EQIP has a cap of $450,000, while CSP has a $200,000 cap, and that's for the whole life of the 5-year contract. So different years could have different payment rates as long as the maximum of the 5-year contract isn't $200,000. And that goes into the contract period that all CSP are 5 years, while EQIP can be 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, depending on what type of practice you're signing up for. CSP must include practices or not. It depends on what you're signing up for. You could do enhancements instead in CSP, and we'll go into kind of the differences between those two later on in the presentation. Also, timing of payments is different for both of these contracts. at practice certification is when each EQIP was done, so they get paid right after they've implemented the practice. Whereas CSP, there is a one-time payment in the fall, and it's for what they've done in the previous years. So it's a payment after the practice has been implemented. Just wanted to go over some rules about EQIP and CSP. They can be done at the same time as long as you're not doing the same practices. So the two can run concurrent to each other as long as you're doing two different types of projects on the ground. And we looked into the forest reserve and CSP program are not compatible together at the same time. You can take the forest reserve out. So if you wanted to do a CSP contract for 5 years, you could take it out and receive the payment. And then once the contract's over, you could re-enroll it back into the forest reserve. Kind of similar to how CRP ground program works. Just wanted to do CSP in a nutshell. So if a producer walks in our office, say at NRCS, I give them kind of this spiel as the selling points to say, this is what the program is. Does this still interest you? So I say it's a 5-year contract. You will receive an annual payment. The program is intended for the operator or whoever manages the ground. We do whole farm planning, plan on all ground within the operation, and a new conservation practice must be implemented on your contracts. So for each land use that you have enrolled, so say you have forestry and you have associated ag land and you have farmstead, you have to have a new practice on each one of those land uses. It doesn't have to be on all of the acres. You could just do a small percentage of your operation. And some of the practices you do one time during the contract and some are continual. And once you start the practice, you need to do it for the life of the contract. So that's just kind of CSP in a nutshell for the selling points of explaining how the program works. I wanted to go into a little bit of contract structure. So yes, it is a 5-year contract. So it's written for 5 years. There is an annual payment that's made after October 1st. There are some base practices associated with CSP. EAP 1 is based on the land uses that are in there, and there's an annual payment for that. And EAP 2 is based on the number of resource concerns that are met at the time of the application. So those two practices are paid every year for the 5 years contract. And then you can add on your new enhancements for more payments. And a new activity needs to be planned and implemented within the first 12 months of a contract. So this is same as the rules of EQIP in that something needs to be planned the first year of the contract. A scheduled activity is not required every year of the contract. So those would be the activities or the enhancements, but those E300 payments are there every year. So it just gives you some background of how these contracts are set up. So I'm just going to go into CSP applicant eligibility. So this is typically for a cropland system, but it does apply for forest ground in that they need to be the ones that are sharing in the risk of producing the crop. They need to be making the daily management and administration and performance of the operation. So that is who is eligible for this program. Land eligibility is basically every land use. So we have private ag land, Indian land, your NIF ground, your associated ag land, your farmstead, and public land can be enrolled in the program as long as you're the one making the effective control of decisions on that. So if you are releasing from renting ground from a state park, you would be eligible to enroll as long as you're the ones that are making the decision on that ground and managing it. Agricultural land must compete separately from NIF. So NIF will have its own application for only forestry ground. So a participant could have 2 applications if they have ag land ground and forestry ground. Land that is ineligible for CSP is ground that's normally in another program already. So that would be the Conservation Reserve Program if it's in an easement or if it's under another CSP contract. If it's newly acquired and they can't establish their management system, that land would be left off till they've managed it. NRCS must document the reason why any land was excluded from a contract. So I just wanted to define forest, and I say this as an update because the rules have kind of changed with the different farm bills. And we just got a new 530 manual, so in the last 2 years, the definitions kind of changed a little bit. Land on which the historic and/or introduced vegetation is predominantly tree cover managed for the production of wood products or non-timber forest products. So basically, any ground that is in trees would fit the forest definition. There is no acre size minimum, so you can be enrolling 1 acre up to 500 acres, so there's no minimum size on that. I wanted to talk about forest land can be enrolled either in a classic or a NIF, but not both. I look at this as to how the forest ground is being managed. If it's being managed for timber production and for the product that they're selling, then that would qualify as forest land. If they're managing it more for wildlife purposes, you can define it as associated ag land. In your case, we're going to be dealing with NIF contracts. This is more of an explanation to the field office or why you might be developing a forestry plan on ground that's in an ag land application. Just kind of wanted to define the operation. Also wanted to define associated ag land. It's land associated with the farms that are not purposely managed for food, forage, and fiber, and are typically associated with nearby production or conservation lands. I just describe this as any other green grass that is growing on your operation. This would qualify as associated ag land. These are all the odd areas that they happen to have seeded down in their operation on field edges or along field creeks or things. Those would be defined as associated ag land. And this is more of just a clarification that is used for our conservation planners, but it might apply for you too. An applicant's agricultural application includes all eligible and ineligible land as described below, whether continuous or non-continuous, that meets both of the following criteria. That it's under the effective control of the applicant and it is managed by the applicant. Associated ag land does not have to touch other eligible CSP ground. The example that I like to use with this is if you have 75% of a tract is in CRP and 25% of it is still seeded down to grass, that would be qualified as an associated ag land. So if the tract is listed as part of their operation, it could be counted in as eligible. So this is just the planning process that definitely an NRCS employee does. This is also probably similar to what you guys are doing in the field when you go out to a forest stand and walk through it. So you want to do a field visit to aid in assessing the resource concerns, identify what's out there, and you want to put that on your maps of what's eligible crop plant or farm forestry ground or what isn't part of their operation. You might want to identify any practices that exist out there. This is where you're asking the applicant about their management questions of how they're managing the timber, if they're doing any nutrient management, pest management, basically your questions to ask about their operation of how they're running it and how they plan on doing it. So this would be your determining your areas and practices to improve. Those areas that they want to improve, then you could roll into activities that are enhancements that are scheduled in your CSP contract. So this is your background information that you're using. You will probably relay this information to your NRCS employee and they will use it for the ranking process and for the application and the planning purposes. I just wanted to go into the CSP ranking system and how this is done. So it's based on what they've already done, what they're going to be doing new on their operation, and how many resource concerns are being met. And so those are the 3 basic points of it. NRCS uses a tool called Conservation Assessment Ranking Tool that asks us a series of questions related to each resource concerns, and they get points and values of telling it if the resource concern is met or not. So this is just a table that goes over all the applicable resource concerns, and for each land use, you can go down to the NIF 1, and those little X's are the resource concerns that have to be assessed for CSP. So in this case, we have degraded plant condition, we have water quality degraded plant condition, we have soil quality degradation, and we have fish and wildlife inadequate habitat under terrestrial, and we have soil erosion related concentrated erosion and wind and water erosion. So there is 7 resource concerns that get assessed with NIF, and then each land use tells you which ones need to be assessed. So the ranking is also done on priority resource concerns. So there are 8 priority resource concerns for NIF identified. These are identified by the CSP subcommittee adopted by the state conservationist is who approves them. And they typically match the priorities of Iowa. And these priority resource concerns are key in ranking, not necessarily for the eligibility of CSP. So these just tells you the ones that are priorities for forestry. We have concentrated erosion, degraded plant condition, pest pressure, soil quality limitations, and terrestrial habitat are the top 5. And there's a few other ones that are thrown in there for credit too. So these are the forestry CSP questions. I identified the resource concerns in the different categories. So these would be the questions that the field has to answer related to this piece of ground. So we're looking at sheet and rill erosion. So the blue is basically kind of the question that's being asked, and then the black would be kind of the answers. So is there sheet and rill erosion? Is the site stable or not stable? Is there classic gully present on site? Are there livestock present? What type of forest group is out there? If it's primary tree composition of the stand, so is it oak or hickory, or I'm not a forestry person, but basically whatever the dominant forest type out there, there's a list of about 15 categories that you can choose from. The forest community quality, what percentage of the stand is in a stable condition? The status of the client forest management plan, if there's one already written, if they're following the plan, or if they're not following the plan. Those are kind of the options available. The managed tree species are native and best suited for sustainability and fit with the client's objectives. So that's just a yes or no. The stand stocking levels are appropriate for the site. Apparently I can't type. And fit with client's objectives. Is the tree vigor within stand or management unit, forest wildlife hazard present, percentage of the site that has forest conditions that will support the ignition and propagation of active wildlife? Is the plant pressure undesirable or invasive species, and what the terrestrial habitat is? So this is what the field office is answering all of these questions. So when you're developing your forestry plan, I think a lot of times you answer these situations already, so this won't be anything new, but it might be something that the field office asks you directly if they don't know the answer. It might be things to consider putting in your forestry plan when you're writing them. I just want to talk about the forestry plan. You can continue writing your plans as you have been. You don't need to be changing it specifically for CSP, but if you are working directly with them, you might want to, these are things that you might want to consider. Develop or update a forest management plan in consultation with NRCS personnel and a professional forester to direct the management of the property. Include activities required to implement the enhancement. I know you don't have all of ours memorized, and sometimes there's a back and forth between NRCS determining which practice is the best one. Might be something you do research on. I just wanted to let you know that each enhancement does describe the criteria that's to implement the enhancement, documentation and implementation requirements. And this is broken down to what the participant will do and what NRCS will do. And this is where the forestry plan falls under what NRCS will do, in that a forestry plan needs to be in place. And you are primary people that write them for us. There's also an NRCS documentation review that they have to bring in as proof of that they have completed the enhancement. And you will probably be asked as a forester to verify that it does meet standards. This goes into CSP stewardship threshold eligibility as to what needs to be done to be eligible for a CSP contract. At least 2 resource concerns at the time of the contract offer must be met, and at least 1 additional resource concern by the end of the contract. So 3 resource concerns need to be addressed in order to be eligible for CSP. And it is a little stricter for CSP renewals. you must meet or exceed 2 state priority resource concerns and categories. So then you need to be meeting 2 of those 8 that we mentioned in a previous slide, where with the general new one, you just have to meet 3 resource concerns. So it's a little bit stricter with CSP renewals. There are basically 3 types of payments available through CSP, and I kind of hinted at this with the annual contract payment bases are on 2 components, which are the land uses and the number of resource concerns. Then the supplemental payments would be all your activities and your enhancements that you have planned. And there is a minimum contract payment. So $1,500 is the minimum per year. This does get applied to NIF contracts because they are often smaller, so they might not meet that. So something to consider is that every NIF contract will be at least $1,500 per year. There is a cap of that 200,000 that I talked about earlier. So these are the payment rates. So we were talking about NIF versus associated ag land. They only pay 50 cents per acre, so they are paid at the same rate. And I was talking about the resource concern categories. They get paid $300 per number of resource concerns that are met. So we saw that there was 7 associated with NIF, and if they were meeting 4 of them at the time of the application, then they would be getting $1,200. So it is a nice little supplement that they get paid. So this just gives you a little calculation of how you did this. This is the EAP1 payment, which is based on the acres of each land use times the land use rate. So you have the NIF, and this applies for every land use you have. So your NIF, your associated ag land, and your farmstead, and that would be the summary of what your EAP1 payment would be. So the EAP2, this is the component for the resource concern, and it's only contracted once through the contract, but it's for 5 years. So this is the resource concerns met at the time of the application, times that $300 rate. Just wanted to go into planning activities for CSP because sometimes there's confusion relating to this. Planners must schedule conservation activities to recur for the remaining years of the contract after the first year scheduled. This is normally related to management practices. So I don't know if this applies to most forestry ones, but say you were doing a cover crop that once you started planning it, you would need to do it for the life of the contract. Whereas if you're doing a tree planting, that would only be once during the life of the contract when you planted it and put it in. So that's what it's just saying. The conservation activity depends on if it's a management or a one-time implementation. At one point in the past, activities needed to be planned by the 3rd year. This rule is now gone. Activities can be planned to start any year with the contract. They might have something scheduled the 5th year of the contract, and that's acceptable. Just be careful to make sure that they implement it because the contract expires. So planning the 5th year might get a little sketchy on if you want to plan something. Use the activity list to determine the maximum number of times an activity can be scheduled. This would be more on the NRCS side, but the activity list is open to the public if you want to look at it. I wanted to talk about conservation practices versus enhancements. Practices are exactly the same as what's on your EQIP cost list. It's the basic management of that contract. It has to meet NRCS standards and specs. The 2 can be planned together, practices and enhancements. That is not considered a duplicative. The enhancement payment scenarios reflect only the cost of the additional criteria of the enhancement, and that's why they can be planned together because they're being paid for separate items within the practice. So this is just a list of NIF practices that can be enrolled into your contract. So your brush management, your herbaceous weed cover, conservation cover, prescribed burning, your riparian forest buffer, tree and shrub establishment and preparation. It also goes into your wildlife management of rare and declining habitat, upland habitat, and your structures for wildlife, and your forest stand improvement. So these are practices that you're already planning and probably putting into plans. So this is nothing new. They'll just give you a description of typical practices that would be in a NIF contract. So CSP enhancements that exist in Iowa CSP contracts. This is a list of them. they take practices to one more step in conservation. They're normally targeted towards a specific type of habitat or specific type of management. So you can be doing brush management on your timber stand or just herbaceous weed treatment. Talking about conservation cover and seeding for our pollinators and our monarch, which is a common subject that gets planned. Talking about management of a timber ground with doing a burn in your habitat, seeding new plants for carbon sequestration, doing tree. Getting down to the E66 ones down here are your timber forest stand improvement, and these are typically getting towards specific types of forest types and how you're managing it. Getting management for wildlife habitat would be your snags, your dens, and your coarse woody debris. So there's specific requirements for each of these enhancements, and you'd have to read them. Hopefully the field office will do that legwork for you, but it might be something to consider for your conversations when you're planning with on forest ground. So I was gonna have this prepped, but I don't. So CSP, NRCS did get a new website. We just went to a new one. So if it looks different from the last time you did, it has been updated. This is the link for Iowa. Every single enhancement is listed on there. And I wanted to talk about CSP bundles. They are enhancements working together to provide an increased conservation benefit. There's at least 3 enhancements required in each bundle. These are nationwide created. I think the 4th bundle would be the one that might be the most applicable to Iowa. It's improved forest health for wildlife habitat and pollinator conservation. You address degraded plant condition, fish and wildlife habitat, and insufficient water. So you have 3 different forest managements associated with this. You have a tree planting, and you also have conservation cover planted related to pollinator in there too. So you would have to be doing all 4 of those, or 1, 2, 3, 4, all 5 of those enhancements in order to get this payment. And it helps with their ranking, and it's at a higher rate payment sometimes. So CSP bundles typically don't get planned in Iowa because there's so much involved with each one, but it is an option to consider. Just wanted to talk about annual payments a little bit. Make payments as soon as applicable after October 1st. They need to bring all of their records to prove that they have completed it. NRCS may request practice certification by you as a forester to make sure that it met the standards and criteria. We are also confirming that they still have control of the land and that the direct deposit hasn't changed. And we modify the contracts if something wasn't implemented when it was planned. So that's how our annual payments are making. The field offices are making those right now. The certifications are done September 30th for practices, so they probably already contacted you for those this year. And I just wanted to do a quick on CSP renewals. But they have to maintain the level of stewardship that's already on their contract, which also includes any enhancements or activities they had planned. The participant needs to stay the same. If they acquired new land, they can include it into the contract. And the CSP renewals, there is no 2-year cooling off period that used to exist at one point. That has now gone away. So those are just some basics on CSP renewals. They're ranking those right now, and the deadline is November 10th, which is tomorrow, to get those ranked. They will probably all be picked up for funding this year because we got $10 million. So I think they will all be selected, just to give you a heads up. So that is the end of my presentation. I would like to go over any questions that you have verbally or in the chat. I hope this gives you a little background information on CSP so that you'll feel more comfortable talking about it. Feel free to reach out to me. I know it's a big program and a lot involved, and you don't have to get as in the weeds as us as NRCS employees, but I think it's good to give you a background information. I am trying to do as much outreach as I can, get more people promoting the program and comfortable with it. All right, I have a hand up for Sarah, if you would like to ask a question.
Yeah, this is Sarah Bell, DNR Forester in Western Iowa. I've got the CART questions in front of me from a site visit I had recently for CSP, and noticed that just looking at the forest group options, that none of them were really relevant to the forest type that we had at the time.
Okay.
And I'm just curious, like, if that maybe that doesn't matter all that much, or if it's a possibility that there could be more groups in the future that are more close to like what we've actually got on the ground.
Right, and those are nationally decided and they are typical systems. Iowa does have hints as to which ones to use. Is there kind of like an other category? I don't have it memorized or in front of me. So I think you would choose the one that's most similar to the type of tree that you have out there.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make sense? It's not really designed to answer everything is part of the problem, so.
Sure, that makes sense.
Rubiana, this is Bailey. I just wanted to say that those are based off soil types that's set by the Northern Research Station of the Forest Service. So if you look at just what the historic cover should be based on that soil, that should give you your answer, Sarah.
Thank you for the clarification, Bailey. I appreciate it. I know a lot about CSP and very little about forestry, so thank you.
Hi, Rubiana. This is, oh,
yeah, go ahead.
I've only ever written a handful of CSP plans, and I have always just done enhancements because the practice plus enhancement was confusing to me. So you're saying that you can, when you are prescribing practices, the codes are the exact same as they are with EQIP. Is the rate the same as well, or does it change when it's through CSP?
No, it has the same payment schedule for EQIP and CSP. The same ones are used, so the rates are the same.
Okay.
The practice and the enhancement can't be scheduled together if the practice has already been implemented. So that's why sometimes doing just the enhancement is safer, but because of the payment rates, I like to pair them together because then they get kind of a higher rate. So as long as it hasn't been implemented, you can do the two together.
Thank you.
So yeah, I answered the question about EQIP and CSP. They are at the same rates. We use the same cost list for both programs. Are foresters required to be the ones that certify enhancements, or can it be done by NRCS? I have a situation where someone went to check a CSP enhancement that was done and I was not even aware it was completed. They reached out because they did not know what they were looking for. So this is why somebody with job approval needs to approve it. So if it's something that they have knowledge in, they can certify. But in most cases, we don't have the experience, so that's why I think it's best that the foresters are certifying these practices, because you're the experts on it and we're not. So I'm hoping they're reaching out to you. I have another question that says, can you share the matrix of compatibility enhancements as well as the associated practice job spreadsheets? So that is on our website, all of this information. Let me see if I can bring it up quick for you and just give you kind of a visual of what our website does look like now. So in order to stay on the Iowa page, I recommend that you don't click these tabs up here, because then that will take you to the national pages and that will not have Iowa specific stuff. So you want to come down here to each of the programs So we're talking about the Conservation Stewardship Program. And I am on a slow internet, so be patient. So if you come down here, this is where it talks about the enhancement guide sheets. It also has your activity list here. And I don't know if that associated practice thing that you're talking about is open to the public. So I can share that with Nick, a copy of that, and he can distribute it out to you. So all these enhancement activities out here are summarized by resource concerns that they're being met. So forest management one, let's just click on one of these. So this is what the job sheets look like. Let me make it a little bigger so you can read it. So this talks about what land use it can be used on. So I obviously picked a crop one apparently. And the resource concern and lifespan of the practices. It goes into the criteria of what's needed to meet that. So that was what I was talking about of all the little items that need to be met. And then down here talks about the participant will. So this is the documentation that they need to provide for information for you. And then there's also like NRCS will. So this is where it talks about having a plan written by the forester. So it says under NRCS will, and they will be probably reaching out to you to have a plan written. And then there's documentation criteria down here that they verify that they have met this criteria. So this is what an enhancement job sheet looks like. There might sometimes be another sheet that's specific for Iowa criteria, and that will go into identifying specifics. So that is what the enhancements in the job sheet looks like, and I will try and get a copy of that matrix to you so you can have access to that, Bailey. And the next question that is in here is the $300 per resource concern paid annually. And yes, that is. So that's a flat rate that is paid every year based on the resource concerns met at the beginning of the year. So that is part of that base annual payment that they get every year. So I think I answered all the questions in my inbox. If there's any more thoughts, feel free to raise your hand. I'm just trying to get as much information out there so that that we can all make wise decisions and outreach. So I have Lisa raised her hand.
Yes, I believe it was on the slide that you had the blue and black text of the question answer, what you guys had to go through. That I had gotten, made these notes on, but you were talking about that you guys are looking at, that we're supposed to, ideally on our plan, we have noted whether the presence or absence of classic gully erosion, invasive species, the stand stocking levels. So for the gully erosion, is that something that, I mean, in most forested ravines and so on and so forth, is that a ranking something that we should be somehow, making sure to put in there because it's pretty much in every, timber that I walk in. And so is that
Right.
something that I should put at the top or have in there, or is that making a big difference?
These are the questions that NRCS will be answering. If you could give simple statements about it in your plan, that would answer it. If not, I mean, the NRCS participant might be going out to the field too. So these are just ideas of things that might need to be included in your plan, or it might be part of your conversation that you're having with the NRCS employee of, okay, they're ranking it. I have questions. Were you out on the site? Can you answer these for me? So this was just more of a background information and maybe things that you want to consider when you're writing your forestry plan or what you're looking at in the field.
Okay, that helps. And then one other thing with this page here that we're on, the stand stocking levels are appropriate for the site and fit with the client's objectives, yes or no. A lot of times we are, so answering no isn't a bad thing there because you said correct?
Yeah, you can answer yes or no. The only, I mean, I say it should be how it is actually being managed in the decision. So if you answer no, it might not properly address the resource concern, but if the forest site is not being managed and it's overgrown, then maybe it isn't, the answer would be no. It's not being managed properly, so that's fine.
But what how I read that is, you know, at the beginning, before while we're writing the plan, the stand stocking level is not ideal, and the plan is addressing that to get it
Yep.
to the ideal. And I know that on one part of the cart, you know, you're kind of looking at before stand description and after, you know, practice or description of stand. And so I don't know if it's getting at that. I just, you know, the way that you kind of said it made it seem like a bad thing, that it was
No, it's not a bad thing. There are descriptions that NRCS employees have for notes about making these decisions and what tools. So there might be a better description on that for guidance. And that can be another thing that I pass on is kind of the iCart questions if you want to see them. Or the iCart guidance is what we call it.
very good. No, that would be helpful. Any other information would be helpful. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I can share that information if you guys are interested. So yeah.
Hey, Rubiana, I think Alex has a question on the chat.
Yep, thanks. When my box is low, I can't see everything, so thank you. All right, I see one of the cart questions is about whether or not livestock are present. Are practices, in example, thinnings being done in grazed timber for CSP? I think you can do that as far as I'm concerned. There is probably more questions if you answer yes to livestock. They're going to ask about how it's being managed. So yes, there are practices that can be related to grazing in your timber ground for CSP. And Bailey has her hand up too.
Yeah, Rubiana, I just since I work a little bit more closely with some of the offices, since I'm stationed in so many of them, I get some questions pretty frequently from the foresters about different scenarios. Pretty recently, I had someone reach out to me and say that their DC said a practice or enhancement had to be implemented on every acre of the forest that they were proposing for NIPF, and if you could just give some feedback on that. I also have several other questions that I think are just good examples of what you might run into.
Oh yeah, so that is kind of a misconception, and I'm kind of surprised they said that. But no, enhancement doesn't need to be planned on every acre. So that would be a false statement. If you're doing a tree and shrub planting, you might only do it on half an acre of the 20-acre field. So it doesn't have to be applied on all of the acres. So there is some flexibility in where you plant things.
Thank you. Another thing I had was if, and this one is one that you've kind of already addressed, but somebody had done an EQIP application and used the forestry and improvement practice, and that has a 5-year maintenance agreement associated with it. And then they went to do CSP and started choosing E666 practice or enhancements on those same acreages. And a DC said that they were not allowed to do the work on the same acres because of that practice maintenance agreement associated with EQIP. So could you debunk that one for us?
So yes, the enhancement can be scheduled because as I said, it's above and beyond. It's something extra than what was on the original practice. So yes, the 666 practice needs to be maintained as through its EQIP, but you could only schedule the enhancement with CSP, and what's required with the enhancement is above more than what they did on the EQIP, so it can be scheduled. Because it's something different. Yep.
Right. And the last one that I had, which was one of the more fun ones I got to answer, was if those forestry bundles, the idea was it was suggested to the forester that The enhancements had to be scheduled across the whole property and be done to every acre, and they would receive a payment for each of those enhancements on each acre that the property had. So if you could just debunk
Oh
that
yeah,
one as well.
it's, bundles are normally confused and misplanned, so I can understand why that happened. The bundle, like I said, has at least 3 enhancements that need to be implemented, so all 3 of those would need to be met. And they're scheduled as a bundle, and it's all one lump payment. So yeah, you kind of got a weird situation going there. They are getting paid for the enhancements, but all in one payment. And so you'd only be scheduled at once as the bundle on the contract. So, and it doesn't have to be on all acres. Again, it's just where you plan it, you put it on the map, and that's where it needs to be done. So the acres can be defined by the participant and by you as the forester saying this is where it needs to be implemented. So did that answer your question, Bailey?
Yeah, I think so. I just think that the big take home for all of this, I think for everyone that's on the call and listen to the call, is to really focus on communication with your NRCS office. A lot of these questions can be answered by them, and as long as you are openly and actively communicating with them that you're planning on elevating a producer to a CSP program, they should be able to walk through that process with you and allow you the time to pick the appropriate enhancement that you want to see on the ground. So any lack of communication on our end or NRCS's end would probably be the biggest reason why things don't get implemented correctly or done properly based off your plans. So if you can just keep nudging them and making sure that you're keeping that line of communication, I think there'll be a lot of things improved.
Yes, thank you for the summary. I appreciate that. I am trying to educate my own staff because there is a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding about this program. So, and you just pointed that out, Bailey, with your questions, and that some DCs are giving different messages out there. So I'm trying to keep them educated. I don't want to put any more work on your plate. You guys do a fantastic job. I love your forestry plans. I just wanted to point out the forestry plan are needed with most of these enhancements, but it doesn't say at what time it's being developed. Hopefully the NRCS office is reaching out to you before it's contracted so they know what to put on their NIPF contract. It just says that one needs to be developed before we certify the practice, just to give you kind of a timeline that a forestry plan is needed with a lot of these enhancements. So they hopefully will be reaching out to you to develop those. So. I definitely appreciate your time. Hopefully that we clarified some things up. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or work through Nick. And hopefully we can get some more NIF CSP contracts out there. Thank you
Thank
and
you,
have a great day.
Thank you, Rubiana. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yep. I think I emailed the slides out, but we can make sure that you get a copy of them. I'm going to hopefully send all these resources to Nick and he can get it out to you.
Sounds good. I'll send that out to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Bye.
Bye.